And this is about clarity and consistency and continuity of the systems that you put into place, all right? So what I mean by a system is, are you creating time for teacher interaction, all right? What's the clarity of the assessment systems and the monitoring system? And are you certain that the right type of support kicks in when you find the youngster is falling behind? And in these outstanding schools, the systems, I find, are really deeply embedded. But they're so well embedded, you don't actually see them on a day-to-day basis, but they're there. And it's that which gives the sort of the calmness to the school and the sort of the well-runness to the school. And although I talk a lot about systems, it's not instrumental. The schools are pretty happy places because the systems are in place. And all of that is what, in a sense, what you have to be doing when you get the community buy-in, and then it's actually redesigning the organisation around those needs. The internal accountability and reciprocity. I've talked a bit about reciprocity. I want to come on to the internal accountability a bit this afternoon, because I do think that this is, in a sense, where the rubber hits the road in terms of teacher behaviour and teacher resistance. And I'd like to talk a bit about that this afternoon, go into a bit more depth on that. And then the leadership works to change context as a key component of their improvement strategy. So, I know a lot of your schools, a lot of you are changing the expectations of the community by what you're doing inside the school. That's what Paul Grant did, Robin, at Robert Clack. He changed the expectations of the community in terms of what the youngsters could achieve. Interestingly, I don't know whether you picked this up, Robin, but one of the things that Paul did in order to try and build a bit more of a cohesive sort of school culture, to put a level of sort of higher aspiration in the youngsters, he put a lot of emphasis on sport. And Woodward, Sir Clive Woodward, who you will remember because he managed our rugby team at one point, described Robert Clack as being one of the best sports schools in the country. So he was using sport as a way of raising aspiration and building the links out into the community. So leadership here, what I'm trying to say, is really, really, really important. And it's often easier to get a sense of the contrast, to get a sense of this through sort of contrasting, sort of different situations. And I'll tell you one story, and then I just want to go on to another slide on leadership. I got a chum called Sam Stringfield, who is a good professor and does really, really good work. His work is worth reading. He did a study in the 90s now, early 90s, in Louisiana on school effectiveness. And I think it's really sophisticated work in terms of the characteristics of effective schools, characteristics of those schools which really add value to youngsters and those who didn't. And as part of their research, they identified a group of what they called negative outliers, schools which were consistently taking value away from kids, and then a group of schools which were consistently adding value. And having done the research, they then sent teams of researchers into those schools to try and map the differences in culture there. And they didn't tell the researchers, which school they were sending them to. But he said, look, David, it was dead easy. All you had to do was ask one question of the principal. And the question was, how good are the teachers in your school, right? And all of the principals in the low achieving schools, the negative outliers, said the same thing. All my teachers are good. They work individually in their own classrooms, and I don't interfere with them. Huh? And that was the answer, and that was also the explanation why those schools were down there in terms of their achievement. You asked the principals in the high achieving schools the same question, and they say, "Oh, that's really interesting. You should go into Robin's classroom, because Robin's become our champion of sort of constructivist ways of learning. He's just done his master's in this, and he's running PD for the rest of the school in trying to actually sort of create, effective ways of scaffolding, working in zones of proximal development. And then go and talk to Lena, because she's our champion for cooperative learning, and she's really been developing some really imaginative ways of actually structuring cooperative groups, which are both quite formal in some ways, but also quite loose. And we can then moderate that depending upon the learning needs. Do you see what I mean? So the schools were very, very highly instructionally focused, but also using the expertise of staff to actually sort of impact upon the culture of those schools. And another sort of contrast is really in this slide here, which is taken from the report.